Genshin is getting close to an end, and you want to know what in the world is going on. The Fatui, the dragons, gods, the descenders, the travelers, the false sky. I mean, we just visited the moon, right? Why is there a false sky? Why is there a heavenly principles at all? Why do so many hate them, and yet not completely? This isn't just another video explaining all the Archon quests. This is the video that takes the entire world building and makes it make sense, from past to present. Everyone will benefit, from veteran to newbie, because with this video, there is no barrier to entry. And for my new folks out there thinking of getting in, or just enjoying the story of a riveting anime 6 years in the making, there is a special seat for you right here in the front row. Now is a perfect time to install the game and enjoy. With the arrival of Snezhnaya, the story over all these years is quickly approaching a climax that many of us have been building towards since the days of quarantine and social distancing. And now the story and game have become near and dear to many. Come and enjoy the story with us, and then afterwards, you can branch off to any of my other videos about specific topics in more depth, or videos from many of my fellow lore content creators. I'm the Unlikely Genshin Gamer, and welcome to the world of Genshin Impact. This is part 1 of the Teyvat storyline prequel. Because the story of Genshin is so rich and builds upon so many facets of a colorful history, this is part 1 of a trilogy of videos. Part 1 will be Conquest, Part 2 Order, and Part 3 Chaos. Therefore, this first section will cover the period of time of the early dragons, the fall of the moons, and the fall of the great cities which led to the Archon Wars. Timestamps below for later reference, so do consider subscribing and leaving a like. Thanks again and enjoy. The history of Teyvat begins thousands and thousands of years before the moment most people think of when they imagine the overarching story. The separation of the twin travelers happened only 500 years ago, but in comparison, the reasons they came to this planet at all, or even how they got in, are based in the early history. This history, from millennia ago, is the true root of all the conflicts in the story. When you understand these segments, the whole damn thing is going to make that much more sense. The starry universe outside of Teyvat was once home to many, many civilizations. They'd traverse the cosmos regularly, and interstellar travel was a thriving networked system. Amongst the species out there expanding their horizons was a race that hailed from almost the beginning of time itself. We'll call them the Chroniclers, since that's what they do. These Chroniclers watched things unfolding in the expanse of the universe and took note of the state of it at large, especially when a mysterious dark occurrence called the Abyss started destroying worlds en masse. This abyss is not just the monsters you might see running around in the world, but an actual, intangible destructive force in the universe, which for clarity's sake we will call the Destruction, to separate it from the monsters. This destruction has been swiping through the universe, erasing so many worlds that the universe was now in crisis. This decline seems to have struck multiple known worlds, including Octavia's homeland and many that she visited in her travels, and the traveling siblings world. When this sword was last drawn, humankind was trying to preserve a doomed world. That world was their last and only home. This sword was drawn to defy that fate of destruction. The chroniclers noted this and took measures to figure out a way to stop it. Interstellar travel and communication between worlds was pretty much unheard of after a while, but that did nothing to stop the spread. They used advanced tech and time-gazing abilities to look into the future to test various timelines for a chance at glimpsing a solution. When this also failed, they took to simply documenting or chronicling the worlds that were gone and those few that were left. It is not yet clear why they were so religiously carrying out this chronicling mission. But during this process, one of the chroniclers noticed and was impressed by the little isolated planet far off on the spiral arm called Teyvat, and traveled there to meet the being who presided over that world. That great being was a dragon king named Nibelung, who ruled a fairly high-tech world populated by dragonkind. This specific chronicler, who will be called the Voyager hereafter, told Nibelung about the destruction sweeping through the universe and warned him that if he didn't leave his people and travel with her, it would catch up to him as well. He thanked her for this crucial information, but insisted not to abandon his people, the dragons, and instead seeked to find a solution on his own. The Voyager accepted this explanation and went on her way, vowing to visit again sometime later. Nibelung, the Dragon King, took her words to heart and began creating a plan to address this approaching threat. He forged and raised 3 moons from the region of the planet later called Nodcry, and planted them in the sky to anchor the planet and keep it safe in his place, because he was going to leave and head out into the Sea of Stars on a mission to find a way to cheat the end. While he was gone, dragonkind, which were divided into 7 different nations, continued to advance in technology, building an outpost on at least one of the moons, and continued to conduct research and exploration in Nibelung's absence. They also began to search for any messages from him when his journey proved exceptionally long. It appears the Natlan, or Pyro nation of dragonkind, were the most technologically advanced and inclined to space exploration. The Pyro sovereign, Xiacoatl, was regularly involved in updates and information sharing about the various research projects underway on the moon station. Research happening on the moon was not without its dangers, however. One of the researchers was ultimately lost when he went on an information gathering mission. He had hoped that a signal the station had picked up was connected to news about Nibelung, and left to investigate the coordinates, although there was no certainty he would make it back. He was instead met with a strange life form who was desperately trying to send out a message for others to hear. The researcher, Ungien, merged with the being to be able to communicate with it and understand the message, and in doing so, his own form was completely lost. The combined entity made it back to Teyvat's moon and shared the translated message, but Ungien was lost completely in the end. The crucial message was a cry for unity against the approaching darkness. The destruction was out there, but if living life could find one another and unite, perhaps there could be hope, and no one had to face the darkness in solitude. Unfortunately, despite all this, no word was found on Nibelung. The dragon researchers decided to repeat the message back out into space to alert others and perhaps find allies against the darkness. But of course, this was not without its dangers. One researcher, Luceline, decided that perhaps a system to cloak or hide the moon would be appropriate, and such a project began in earnest called the Lunar Veil, while at the same time a method to repeat the message over and over again was devised so that even after the original researchers passed on, it would continue. But they would need the moon goddess's help first. In Nibelung's absence, there were 3 moon goddesses appointed to watch over the world, wielding the immense powers of the 3 moons he'd made. They were more powerful than the dragon sovereigns below on the planet and ruled over the night sky. The 3 goddesses, who were sisters, each presided over her own moon and its power, and was responsible for it being present in the sky to shed its light at its appointed times. The oldest sister, Arya, presided over the largest moon, the eternal moon. It was understood to govern the majority of tidal forces in Teyvat, essentially stabilizing the planet and its seas. Canon was the second oldest, presiding over the middle moon known as the Frost Moon. It was by far the brightest of the 3, casting the most light, and likely the light of her moon generated the most influence on the planet where moonlight energy is concerned, which is very powerful. And the younger sister, Sonnet, was over a small, dim moon which was described as rarely seen and very mysterious. Altogether, the powers of these moon maidens included authority over life, death, time, space, and reason, or the mind. Inside of Teyvat, there were 7 dragon sovereigns who ruled over and maintained each their own domain down on the planet. The dragon sovereigns pertain to the 7 elements present in the game now: pyro, electro, cryo, etc. Although these were not the only elements that existed at the time, thanks to the very versatile energy of the moons. In time, as it began to become more likely that Nibelung would never come back, Project Moongazer became more bold, sending out that signal to address the loneliness. But even though Lucilim had secured backing from the Moon Sisters to provide power for the Veil, the message was sent before the Veil was complete. Therefore, the signal's exact origin was not hidden. And so, after the first broadcast of this repeating message, a very powerful outsider named Phanes arrived on the moon, very likely directly because of this transmission. Phanes was described by later humans as genderless and winged. They were even said to have emerged from an egg and used the shell of that egg to create the veil around the planet that is known throughout the story as the false sky. This egg, however, may be a metaphor for the ship they arrived in. Phanes' arrival ended up damaging the up-and-coming large-scale lunar veil that Lucilim had been desperately trying to erect in time. The veil was shattered, creating the lunar sea, and the new entity, Phanes, decided that they had now found the perfect location to shelter humankind from the destruction. They had arrived in a ship that contained the genetic material required to restart the human race, and were determined to make Teyvat their new home. Phanes is implied to have made a deal with Lucilim, possibly gaining access to some of his research. This caused Lucilim to be exiled amongst dragonkind. With Nibelung still absent, and this Phanes rivaling him in power, the Moon Sisters, created by Nibelung, decided not to oppose them. They welcomed Phanes instead, and shared many secrets, which angered the dragons greatly. The Moon Sisters felt that since Nibelung had once told them that all non-abyss entities that found their way to Teyvat could only serve as allies against the destruction, then this Phanes, with their promises of an ability to spurn the darkness, would be an asset to the planet. Phanes was treated like a guest in the land, and the Moon Sisters eventually also shared the secrets of their very power with them. The Reaver from beyond the skies replaced the primordial creator and gained possession of the vows upon which the 3 caused the world to turn. Eventually, Phanes began enacting an elaborate plan to both steal the planet from the dragons and hide it and its moons, which were deemed essential, from the Dark Destroyer out in the universe. Because the energy commonly found throughout the planet was too powerful and caustic to humankind, an entire terraforming project was undertaken to prepare the planet for humans, and fought a bitter war against the Dragon Sovereigns and the Vishaps, which was another name for dragonkind. The Dragon Sovereigns had been put on high alert of the possibility of an alien finding the planet after the initial transmission from the moon was sent. But they were no match for Phanes and their subordinates. These subordinates were called Shades, shadows of Phanes, also sometimes called archangels. These shades began to represent those authorities of time, life, death, and space, while the authority of reason was left with the primordial one, Phanes themselves. Nibirius was the shade of life, and she was responsible for helping to populate the world with flora and fauna to support the human life that was about to take up residence. Renova was and still is the shade of death, whose responsibility was to establish and maintain an utmost law of the cycle of life and death. Ishtaroth is the mistress of the passage of time, overseeing the beginning and ending of any and everything. And Asmodee was the ruler of space itself. The existence of the space that life occupied, and even the presence of separate special spaces or domains was her responsibility. Together, these four shining shades, as they were called, and the primordial one subdued dragonkind over the next 40 years, all while the Moon Sisters looked on without intervening, which greatly angered dragonkind. Human society was established, and angels were set over them to watch over, protect, teach, and discipline humankind, while dragonkind retreated into seclusion. One such angel was the playable character Nicole. She was young among angels, having arrived later in that era, but was also accustomed to hearing the complaints of the populace and answering or guiding them as was her responsibility. To help the Moon Sisters, who had been seen by Phanes as allies thus far, some angels were given a different title of Moon Envoy or Moon Maidens. They were assigned to the sisters to shoulder some of the duty of maintaining the stability of the planet, its rotation and anchoring and so forth. One such Moon Envoy was Zibai, who answered directly to Ishtaroth, the Time Shade, and Canaan, the moon goddess of the frost moon. Massive cities were established, and humanity enjoyed a golden age for the most part. The Moon Sisters found themselves growing fond of humankind, and even fashioned human-looking bodies for themselves, so that they could blend in with the masses who had learned to worship them. Some of these humans had even come to prefer the sisters' softer approach to ruling over Phanes' iron-fisted ways. The moon goddesses would visit the planet often, sometimes even mixing up their moon duties so that 3 moons could be seen at once, even though there should only ever be one at a time. Moon envoys like Zibai would find themselves picking up some of their slack at times. However, during this age of human resurgence, the chroniclers out there were still observing a decline in the universe. And the one known as the Voyager, who once visited Nibelung and started him off on this journey off into space, came back as she had promised, sensing something was off. And when she came, she found that the world belonged to a new ruler, and Nibelung was missing. The 3 moons that Nibelung had made, and the star of the system along with the planet, were hidden behind a series of force fields, the false sky. In the memories she had archived in the library of her distant homeworld, it was a newly born habitable planet, but now it lay shrouded behind several impenetrable fields, its primordial flame stripped of the radiance it was meant to bear. Most of humanity had no idea the sky was fake, believing simply that the sky that they looked up at every day was the great natural expanse of space, when it was in fact a carefully designed network of constellations, anchoring a specialized system of destinies and reoccurring storylines called fate. This is the fake sky. The system used to handle this fate network was an ancient hidden tree repurposed from the dragons that was called Irminsul. More on Irminsul later. Just know for now that together, this constellation and false stars system helped the primordial one to maintain utmost order in Teyvat. However, the Voyager was growing hopeless with how desolate the universe was becoming, with the futility of her race's mission of chronicling these dying or dead worlds. So, she decided to break a fundamental rule of her race, which was to never interfere with the species they encountered. She was intrigued by the veil around Nibelung's world and who its new rulers were. So she breached this barrier to insert her mind into the planet, becoming irrevocably intertwined with the history of this world that she was only supposed to document. The chroniclers generally traveled through space in some sort of altered way that allowed only their mind to travel along, while leaving their body behind, light years away. So, when the Voyager decided to interact with Teyvat, she needed a body to be able to do it. She took over the body of a young man in the grandest city of the time called Hyperborea, who was described as being of humble birth with star-shaped pupils. The young man with the now altered mind, named Seutervoinen, would soon be known as a remarkable outlander, the Apostle of the Far North. Seutervoinen, being frustrated with the strict and closed-off way humanity and the angels were meant to live, began implanting new ideas amongst the people. This was highly frowned upon, leading to a confrontation with the chiefest and most powerful of the angels under the Primordial One's command, Dawn's navigator and the fairest daughter, named Koitar. In secret, rather than face retribution for questioning the laws, Seutervoinen opened Koitar's mind to the truth of her existence that she had not been able to see thus far. The mental shackles that prevented her from exhibiting strong emotion or preferences, characteristics that could lead her to become opinionated, were removed, and she began to crave true freedom from the way she and humanity had been made to live. Grand secrets of which we are still unsure were shared with her, and her eyes were opened. She fell in love with Seutervoinen right then, and together they decided to mount a rebellion against the heavenly principles and the order they heavy-handedly maintained. The Moon Sisters were again mostly indifferent to this development, it seems, although it is said that they looked on at the union of these two. However, things were about to change for all living beings, including them in a big way. Seutervoinen and Koitar heralded a project of new creation to seek a method of creating an elevated human, a grave sin. They sought to create a human who was more biologically advanced than normal humans, one who, like gods, adepti, the jinn, or other elemental creatures, could wield the power of the elements and moon energy without needing a vision or moon wheel. It would seem they were trying to make a human like the travelers. And this experiment produced a race of diverse, powerful, and often dangerous beings called the Fae. People like Flins, Linnea, and even the Tsaritsa hail from this race. These people, who are now most commonly found in Snezhnaya, came in all shapes and sizes, and really are inherently more powerful than most humans. Seutervoinen taught the people and these newborn Fae technologies derived from the chronicler's home world. One of his most beloved creations was a machine called the Subatomic Mass Patterning Orb, or sample mill for short. Essentially, a 3D printer that could synthesize infinite gold, food, salt, and anything else. The couple oversaw the creation of a great show-stopping tower in the capital golden city of Hyperborea. Sophisticated weaponry was also being created to protect themselves from the Primordial One's eventual wrath when they invaded the celestial city as planned. And both time capsules and cutting-edge biological experiments were being carried out to carry existing humanity to the next level, with the eventual goal being to get them space ready. Of course, nothing good ever stays that way. Instead, it has to come crashing down in a spectacular fashion that changes the world forever. I hope you all are enjoying so far. As we approach the second half of the video, I just want to take a moment to tell you all about the new official top-up center, where you can get a little more bang for your buck if you plan on spending for the brand new characters Odette and Alyosha. This is the HoYoverse Top-Up Center, where you can buy Welkin Moons, your Battle Pass, and of course Primogems. The base price is exactly the same as the old in-game store, but now you can earn extra rewards. If you spend during the promotional period for Snezhnaya's first banners, you can use these coupons to get an extra 8% more Primos on your order, and a bonus 300 Primogems on your first top-up. That means you can get up to 518 extra Primogems on an order, leading up to a total of 2,890. You just have to use my link in the description or pinned comment. Log into your server and character, then buy your preferred item. The extra gems appear in the in-game mail and your purchase shows up immediately, just like normal. Since it's the official top-up center, it's safe. And to be honest, it's the only way I top up, for peace of mind and a little something back. Remember to use the link in the description or in the pinned comment. Enjoy Snezhnaya, the new characters, and all the new lore. And may you win all your 50/50s. Back to the incoming flames of war. Everything, and I mean everything, came crashing down just a short time later in an eventful year called the Year of Funerary Flame. The second throne of the heavens came, and war was rekindled as it was in the world's creation. That day, the heavens collapsed and the earth was rent asunder. Our ancestors and their ancestral land fell into this place during that conflict. The era of darkness had begun. Koitar and Seutervoinen mounted their planned rebellion. They recruited most of the rest of angel kind who wanted to be free of the shackles of their proposed creation too. And many of the newly forged Fae were pulled into the war effort as well. Those dragons who had survived the previous war watched eagerly to see if the rebellion would succeed, and the people who did not believe in Koitar's war remained skeptical and fearful. As the eve of the city's destruction approached, Koitar urged her husband to leave and return to the homeworld of the chroniclers where the Voyager was originally from. They both knew that the war would very likely end in their defeat. However, it's not clear whether or not he took her advice. The Angel Rebellion failed in the funerary year. a giant celestial nail, one of many, came slamming down on the city, cleansing it. These eerie blue missiles are more than just traditionally destructive, but tend to destroy the natural state of a location to a barren, sterile baseline. They are also capable of eradicating abyss energy. The nail that fell on Hyperborea turned the place into a wasteland of winter, completely destroying the city and its outskirts, leaving only golden and white ruins behind. Many of the Fae, who had also been trained to fight against the heavenly principles, were reduced to icy mist, and the few surviving members of Hyperborea, who had been outside of the city when it was destroyed, were reduced to wanderers, trying to navigate the barren tundra. The Frostmoon goddess, Canaan, before she and her sisters were met with a different disaster, took pity on the survivors' suffering, and it is said that she led them south, out of the wilderness, down to the borderlands of Snezhnaya called Nodcry, the land that the moons had originally been pulled from. These survivors begged her to give them a way to differentiate themselves from other humans, as the Hyperboreans had been a proud and progressive people. She obliged and gave them silver blood, and the most powerful of their women would grow magnificent antler crowns. These people took up residence in Nodcry, sealing off themselves from others with a high wall to separate their precious genes from the outside world, and called themselves the Frostmoon Scions because of her help. They managed to save the now dysfunctional sample mill, hoping to one day reactivate it, and soon proceeded to continue work on refining their bloodlines into something wondrous. People like Lauma are the result of some of these carefully arranged marriages. Koitar and most of the angels were defeated, and in defeat were given two choices. Because Koitar had taken the love meant for many and concentrated it in one, her husband, the angels were cursed to never love in this way again. They were then made to choose between giving up their wisdom or their power to continue to subsist in the world and not die. Most of the angels chose to give up their power, reducing them down to the twinkling Seelies floating around in Teyvat, retaining only their most primordial instinct to guide humanity on their way. Some others kept their power but sacrificed their wisdom, becoming powerful beasts, one of which terrorized Mondstadt on and off for millennia. Koitar herself, however, was partially saved from this fate by her husband, who imprisoned her in a special temple in a valley in Nodcry called Amsvartnir, where she retained her intellect and some of her power, but none of her memories, at least for a while. Nicole, as one of the youngest of the angels, was spared most of the carnage of the battle, but when it came time for punishments, she still had to make a choice. However, she was clever with her decision, and instead gave up her voice as a sort of compromise between power and wisdom. Thus she retained her form, but was rendered mortal and mute, until she eventually worked out how to speak in people's minds directly thanks to help from the young mage Alice. Some other angels seem to have fallen into a sort of middle ground, possibly becoming wolves who were said to be the children of the angels. One such wolf was Boreas, a father of wolves from the far north, who, after an encounter with the memoryless Koitar, wherein he could mysteriously understand the language she sang in, decided to call her mother, and was granted special godlike powers from her, and eventually traveled to Mondstadt to try his hand at being a god of humanity like many others. On the other hand, Koitar remembered her tumultuous past after spending so much time with Boreas, and there is a letter depicting her apology to her beloved husband as she insists to leave this sheltered prison that he had put her in on her way to find out how to reach him way out there in space. No one knows where Koitar is anymore, or whether or not she did become a Seelie after she left that temple in Amsvartnir. In Sumeru, another nail fell, turning the lush green forest of the Dendro Dragon Sovereign, Apep, into a massive desert known afterwards as the Great Red Sands. A moon maiden or high-ranking envoy named Nabu Malikata also maintained some of her power and form, but plummeted to the earth, landing in this desolate desert. In her sorrow and desolation, she inadvertently gave rise to a special race of moon spirits named the Jinn, who are said to have appeared from the blood of her blistered feet as she wandered the unforgiving sands. They refer to her as the Mistress of Flowers and their mother, and will follow her every command. The Jinn are elemental creatures who do not need an external means to channel the elements, similar but much less advanced than the Fae. Eventually, Nabu Malikata would become friends with the two gods of wisdom who presided over Sumeru, Rukkhadevata and Al-Akmar, or Deshret. But that history is for the Archon War chapter. In the meantime, something far more devastating was unfolding while this war of rebellion was falling to pieces. After all this time, from deep within the Sea of Stars, the mighty Dragon King Nibelung had finally returned, fully corrupted by the abyss he had sought to defeat. The abyss is a corrosive force to seemingly everything in the universe, so the dragons of Teyvat suffered from this poison that Nibelung brought back with him, even though they had longed for their king for so many years. In his madness, he thought he could wrench the world back from the usurper Phanes using this force called the Abyss, but instead, dragonkind were at a sore disadvantage. The Moon Sisters, Nibelung's appointed custodians of the planet, were torn between frustration with the way the heavenly principles dealt with his subjects and fear for the poison Nibelung had brought back with him. On the one hand, Phanes' nailings had killed so many of the humans the Moon Sisters had grown fond of, and Nibelung was their rightful ruler. But Nibelung's unquenchable anger was now eating up the very world he meant to save. There was disagreement between the sisters, and in the end they were very reluctant to side with either. Nibelung, consumed with rage, was not lenient with them when he realized their indecisiveness and their lack of absolute loyalty to him. He placed the powerful Moon Sisters, who in the end were not powerful enough to oppose either Phanes or Nibelung, in a very special holding dimension called the Moon's Reflection. It was a specialized place where time flowed backwards, and the authority of an entity, the special power that they had, could be trapped for eternity in that space. As in, it was meant to lock down the power that was intricately woven into their very being. The same power they would potentially use to escape is what it was designed to trap. He put all three sisters in this place, both as punishment for their fraternization with Phanes and because they wouldn't wholeheartedly side with him. Then he took each sister's moon, which is where the majority of their power and life force originated from, and transformed them into mighty space-based weapons, capable of destroying swaths of the planet. It's possible that Nibelung had become so blinded by the abyss that he had decided that if he could not have Teyvat, no one would. At this point, it seems he was truly bent on destruction. The Dragon Sovereigns who had survived the first 40 years of fighting with the Primordial One, biding their time to either mount a new rebellion or to fight alongside their king, rose up to join the war at first, but their king had become too sickened by the abyss. He was too far gone. The war between the two great beings damaged Teyvat to an astonishing degree. When Seelies realized the threat the moons now posed, they tossed the moons beyond the boundaries of the false sky and destroyed two of them utterly. The iridescent moon of the youngest sister was dustified, and the enormous eternal moon was blown to massive chunks. The frost moon was spared for an unknown reason, possibly because of Seelies' deal with Lucilim the researcher who had lived on the frost moon, or because Teyvat needed at least one moon to survive. But either way, it was still also thrust beyond the boundaries of the false sky to protect the planet from Nibelung's weapon, and a projection of the moon called the Shadow Moon, an illusion, was what the rest of Teyvat knew to be the moon for thousands of years afterwards. No more visits to the moon in the silver ships, no longer were the souls of the departed allowed to rest on the moon. Because each sister derived their energy and life force from their moons, they could no longer live without them around either. However, they did not die immediately. As they languished in the strange prison called the Moon's Reflection, they were visited by a reincarnated frost moon goddess from the future named Columbina Hyposelenia. She was imprisoned in the Moon's Reflection under circumstances from the present day, but she explained the state of affairs to her counterparts, the three sisters. She told them about the outcome of the war, since in that prison they could know nothing beyond the time they were trapped at. She told them that two of their moons were gone completely, and that the last one had become a dead-end rock outside of the false sky, since its goddess cannon was trapped away and it was sealed away from the planet it was connected to. She told them that Nibelung had lost the war, but that Teyvat had recovered to some degree. However, there was now no real moon within the false sky. To be able to save the planet from the new threat from her own time in the future, Columbina deemed the frost moon essential to her efforts, and that it had to come back into the atmosphere of the false sky during present-day Teyvat. With the sisters' consent, Columbina consumed the power each of them still held, which also was what prevented them from leaving the prison. This caused her to be thoroughly trapped as they had been, but her unique situation afforded her a special workaround. After extracting the sisters' authority from them, they died, and two of the three were reduced to small orbs of reduced condensed power. Then they fell to the planet. Arya, the oldest sister of the Eternal Moon, became a small glowing moon-like orb filled with enough power to kill most humans. That orb, called the Eternal Moon Marrow, was found and protected as a sacred relic by the Frostmoon Scions in Nodcry. The iridescent moon marrow fell, but the deep sorrow and resentments within the youngest sister, as she died, allowed the abyss to exploit her pain, leading to a sort of zombie moon that hung in the sky of Conria artificially. The Conria of ancient days, a kingdom that arose after the fall of the Golden Era cities, would learn to worship the now augmented zombie moon as the Crimson Moon. The abyss preys on an entity's deepest desires, their regrets, sorrows, loneliness, and despair. It's possible that as Nibelung's journey proved long, lonely, and unforgiving, with no sign of that solution he had hoped for so desperately, that this allowed the abyss to take over his soul too, just like Sonnet, the youngest sister. She was artificially kept partially alive by this force, enduring thousands of years of torturous pain. The last moon marrow did not become an orb, even though Kianan did choose to die with her sisters. That remnant of power was instead sprinkled like a sparkling moonlight dust over the land of Nod Cry, making its ecology uniquely different from the rest of nations. Some of that power eventually coalesced to become the young girl who would grow to be Columbina, the third harbinger of the Fatui, who would then eventually go back in time to facilitate her own birth through these events. The last act Columbina Hyperselenia did back there in the past with the sisters was to place a special anchor in the land of Nodcry named Luanatar, who would eventually guide her future self and her friends to the set of actions they would need to take to bring the moon itself, with Columbina's authority hidden in it, back into the atmosphere of Teyvat. But all this would have to wait for thousands of years, as the world of Teyvat changed and suffered. Abyss energy ravaged the planet, and some cities were deemed a lost cause because of it. Zibai, the moon envoy, who presided over Langan to the south, in what is now Liyue, was devastated to learn of her city's ordained destruction too, and tried to intervene when a celestial nail was deployed to purge the residual abyssal corruption in the city. She bravely tried to protect the people, even though she knew it wouldn't work. She was advised by her mentor Ishtaroth to leave the situation alone, but she went anyway. Zibai was all but killed, as her form succumbed to the power of the nail. Ishtaroth, Master of Time, froze her soul in this moment to save her from actual death, and instead divided it into 3 separate selves, caging each one in a separate prison. One in a painting in Liyue, another in a chariot ornament made of ancient jade, left in the rubble of Langan, and her last segment being placed inside the shadow moon, the illusory moon that the people of Teyvat had no idea wasn't real. The slightly deflected nail plunged through the earth, forming the chasm of Liyue, and can still be found buried in its depths to this day. The nation of Langan was destroyed, with a few survivors migrating away to northern Liyue, settling in what is now Chenyu Vale. History exists of other angels or moon envoys who escaped becoming Seelies or beasts, such as Sibylla of Remuria and the Lord of the Night in Natlan. It's possible this was connected to a close relationship with a shade, but we don't know for sure. Numerous other cities fell after the turmoil of this era, along with Hyperborea, the Golden City. Salvindagnar in Mondstadt was nailed, and changed from a lush mountain of greenery into a desolate snowy peak named Dragonspine, though not yet sporting the massive dragon skeleton it would house in later years. Arcadia in the north of Mondstadt was taken away instead of destroyed, and turned into an ongoing museum of memories of the rise and fall of nations called the Temple of Space. Enkanomiya, previously known as Delphi Pytho in Inazuma, was dislodged and fell into a mysterious place known as the Dark Sea. Here in the depths, many refugees of dragonkind, as in the Vishaps, had hidden themselves to go on surviving. The people of Enkanomiya became their prey, living in fear of these Vishaps and being slaughtered by them in the dark, until Ishtaroth, the Time Shade, took pity on them and secretly taught them how to create a massive sun-like apparatus that shed enough light to push back the murderous Vishaps. In Natlan, where it appears the dragons were most high-tech, seeing as the pioneers of the Moongazer project were from Natlan, dragonkind found a foothold during the war, living in general comfort while mankind suffered. The fight between Nibelung and Phanes seemingly culminated in Natlan, with this passage implying that this is where Nibelung died, fully consumed by the abyss, and where the heavenly principles became the forever damaged. You witness with your own eyes the gargantuan wings from beyond the world, the once glorious and grand figure, now pitiable, having completely sunk into the terrifying shadow. The fight devastated Natlan's ley line system, creating a terrible gap in the oversight of the reality of that nation due to the powerful overarching nature of Irminsul itself. And humanity, who depended so deeply on the ley lines, wasted away, while the dragons, in their own way, fought back against this rampant corruption. It is at this point that I should talk more about Irminsul, because it's important to Natlan's history and the world going forward into the era of the Archon Wars. Irminsul and the ley lines together represent an extensive network of roots, blossoms, and trees that support the reality of Teyvat. The main tree resides deep underground, with its branches growing down and its roots coming up toward the surface where people live. It is the world's database. It existed before the arrival of Phanes as a part of the domain of the Dendro Dragon Sovereign, a PEP, but not in this capacity at all. When Phanes arrived, they refashioned the ley lines from transporting raw light realm energy that the moons and original Teyvat featured, down to a milder, diffused form of elemental energy known as ley line energy. According to the prince of the Pyro Dragons, who was a scientist as well, somehow the power of the ley lines was also used to support the protective barrier called the false sky. The roots can sometimes pierce through the surface as ley line blossoms or petrified trees in domains, and the resin that we accumulate at 1 unit per 8 minutes is actually a substance that holds the memories of the world in it. When we give this resin back to a blossom or petrified tree, then the memories held within the resin become tangible items. Overall, Irminsul is a massive literal database of Teyvat itself, with information being fed to it by the ley lines. Think of it as the actual files of the game. The memories of a descender, however, a special type of being in the same class as Phanes and the Traveler, cannot be recorded or altered by Irminsul. Files can be deleted by the right entities, and when they are, the memories of people and the actual physical books, letters, or what have you in the world will be altered accordingly, but not those of descenders. Therefore, descenders can serve as a type of witness of events that have happened in the world, but that were afterwards erased for some reason, because the descender will remember them properly. These memories/files within Irminsul can also be horribly corrupted though, and when this happens, the world itself, the people, and animals in it will reflect this corruption through sickness, memory loss, mental disorders, the environment becoming poisonous, and so on. Sometimes to protect the system, particularly corrupt or fragmented info, like damaged souls, may be rejected from entering or resting in the ley lines as they should. You see, when people die, the sum of their memories, meaning their souls, are deposited into the ley lines to re-enter the stream of data. If those memories were to be restored intact, as occasionally happens, one might see ghosts or illusions of the person reliving past moments. If that person was corrupted by the abyss before dying, they could infect the ley lines when they enter it and spread this corruption. That's why sometimes re-entry is denied. Abyssal energy is a directly corrupting force to the ley lines in Irminsul. However, there are built-in purging abilities that are extremely important to the stability of the world. but even these defenses can be overloaded. Lastly, the Dendro Archon is the appointed custodian of Irminsul, can in fact delete or hide information to a certain extent, and is directly connected to it. Her domain of Sumeru is the birthplace of Irminsul, and she can in essence alter the very minds of the people at will. So, back to Natlan. The ley lines of Natlan were severely damaged by the fight between Nibelung and Seelies. So much so that the reality and afterlife of Natlan were in grave danger. This is likely partially because of the sterilizing power of another nail which can be seen peeking out of the roof of this underground realm, the Night Kingdom. The Night Kingdom is a substitute space created by the Shade of Death Ranova and one of the angels that was spared the Seelie curse, named the Lord of the Night. It was a brand new system very similar to the ley lines that could hold the data for Natlan in it. The angel overseeing it, the Lord of the Night, sacrificed her power to personally provide the energy necessary to keep the system up and running. The Night Kingdom is exclusive to Natlan, and the memories of the nation and its people are contained here instead of in traditional ley lines, although there is still a connection to the normal system in the rest of the world. This makes Natlan operate somewhat differently from other nations though. We'll go into more detail about the state of the different nations in the next major chapter called the Archon Wars. But to wrap up the tremendous events of the Year of Funerary Flame, Seelies was severely damaged by the effects of the war. It is said that their functions were fundamentally damaged. Nibelung died, and most of the dragon sovereigns were either driven into seclusion or died. Except in the case of Shiakoto, the Pyro sovereign in Natlan, whose people partially began this chain of events with the Moongazer project. He was driven mad by the corruption of the Abyss. His 12 AI dragon lords and his brother, the Silver Prince Kukulkan, were increasingly left to oversee the remainder of dragonkind in Natlan themselves. Eventually, his death, at the hands of an ambitious human named Shibalanke, would kick off the beginning of the next era in the history of Teyvat, the Archon Wars. I'm so glad you all have made it this far. The story has indeed been a roller coaster over the years, but I hope I have demystified at least some of it for you all over this hour. The next installment, Order, which covers the Archon Wars until the Cataclysm of 500 years ago, is easily going to have some of the juiciest and most well-hidden reveals of the series, so make sure you come back for that. I hope I've inspired you to try out the game if you are on the fence. Like, subscribe, share, or even consider becoming a member of the channel. And I'll see you guys in the next one.